is not a city that wants to be a stupid city. But the thing is, nowadays, we have something called smart washing. A lot of cities are investing millions to really be the smartest city ever. And it is actually very difficult to define what a smart city is, because each smart city wants to be a pioneer based on different reasons. In the literature, we find a couple of definitions that we actually see as being crucial for the definition of smart city, or these common points that we see in many so-called smart cities. Some of them are innovation, cities that want to be the most innovative cities, cities that want to be the most competitive ones. But we also see that sustainability is actually very high on the menu of most cities. One of the most famous examples is Songdo, a Korean city which is known for being the first real smart city in the world, a city that was supposed to actually host more than 300,000 inhabitants. Right now it only hosts a little bit more than 100,000. And this smart city is actually, as you may see, it looks like a bit of like a mix between New York and Toronto, or Seattle even. It has been actually built and designed to actually have like green spaces, technological spaces. And it is smart in many ways. From an ecological perspective, the city has advanced waste management systems where you actually don't have to deposit your garbage anywhere. It just gets shifted from your house directly into a smart waste management plan. Water is also treated in different ways, so rainwater is all reused. Transportation is very well connected, and the city has plenty of green spaces. Like they have something called like Central Park, basically. But Songdo's smartness is actually only possible because there is this ubiquitous presence of digital technology. There are cameras everywhere. The management by the municipality is all done through algorithms. And basically, this means that the citizens in the city are followed constantly. There is not a single movement that remains anonymous. So the anonymous character of cities that we actually hold dear is lost in a smart city like this one. Because basically, this means that everything is being recorded. At the same time, this city is seen as a very lonely city. You never meet anyone outside because the schedules are so well programmed that you actually don't need to meet anyone. So people describe living in the city as being very lonely. Also, the democratic legitimacy of this smartness is also discussed because citizens played no role in designing the city. Korean authorities decided top-down how the city should look like. So from the perspective of the right to the city, there is no right to the city because there is no involvement of citizens. There is basically just this smart city narrative, which basically means that technology has decided everything. And this is what I find problematic because we see that this also means that many citizens are not being involved in this smart city discussion. So today I would like to discuss with you how the smart city narrative is basically putting at stake fundamental rights. There are a lot of scholars who write on smart cities, but many of them are not lawyers. So geographers, technologists, of course, scholars from economics have delved pages to smart cities, but actually the legal problems are very often forgotten. People usually only talk about privacy, and I'm also, of course, going to talk about privacy, but my main interest is not privacy. I'm interested mostly in the people that are left behind, in the exclusion of citizens in smart cities, in the fact that this smart city technology narrative is basically something that is decided very often by companies, and it doesn't take into account the local public values of each city. And to finish, I will talk about the so-called human rights cities, which are for many regarded as a possible solution for many of these problems. But I must say that I still see very little in the human rights cities, and I would like to discuss with you some of this. So the smart city narrative is basically something that you see very often in cities like Toronto or Montreal, or even in Europe, in Amsterdam. It is basically a story that many companies tell at these very big fairs where municipalities go to acquire new technology. And basically they are told that with smart city technology, like Internet of Things, they can actually control everything, they can allocate their resources much better, and by doing that they can optimize all these different areas. And this is all true. Because there are different areas for smartness, and it is possible to really optimize services by using different technologies. So Smart City really brings together artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, big data. All technologies are basically conglomerated in a smart city, and that's why it's very often used as an example of good or bad use of technology. Smart mobility is also another area of great interest with connected transport systems, with algorithms, with real-time information. We could improve traffic. We could reduce emissions. We could indeed solve many of the problems that all of us have while circulating in the city. However, all this potential for technology has been criticized as well, because actually smart city technology is not really solving daily problems that people have. Like, for example, this, like having extremely crowded trains, like not being able to pay for your ticket, not being able to actually spend more time at work or with your family. Transport poverty is not addressed by smart mobility, because the smart city narrative is all about optimizing systems, but it is impossible to optimize everything, and optimization also has a cost, which cannot be paid by all citizens. So there are actually many citizens who are left behind. At the same time, solving all these problems by technology is actually quite expensive, which means that many cities are opting by actually providing free transportation, and by using technology sometimes to actually create applications to promote that. But the truth is that this has given rise to a lot of questions, because having smart technology really doesn't solve all the problems, and there are also many problems that don't need technology to be solved. So basically, when I talk about the smart city narrative, I'm interested in how actually we have these contracts. On the one hand, we have smart mobility policies that can really help us advance the city. At the same time, we have problems like transport poverty that no one is really addressing, and that technology cannot really fully address, because we have to talk about other things. At the same time, we want to digitize a city, but we're not providing enough digital literacy to the citizens. For many people, it was normal to just go to a train station and buy a ticket, to someone. And nowadays, for example, in the Netherlands, you pay more if you actually really want to go into an office and buy a ticket, and you can only do that during office hours. After that, it's gone. You can't do that anymore. And that means that for older people who are not as digitally literate, it can be challenging. These people are people that are ashamed to ask for help, and yet they can't have the same services as others who are digitally native. You also see that, and this is a problem that I have written quite a lot about, that smart cities all look alike. If you see projects for smart cities in Asia, and not only in Korea, but also in India, you see that they look very much like in Canada or in the United States. You see that cities are looking alike. You have the same kind of transportation methods, you have the same kind of systems, and this actually can be positive, but at the same time, it also doesn't hold regard for the local values that cities also have. For example, one problem that you actually see nowadays is that with digital platforms like Uber or Airbnb, many local values are being put under pressure. Like, for example, in the Netherlands, we have large problems with the fact that in the city center of Amsterdam, there are not many people living there anymore. There are neighborhoods where there are almost no children, because they have all been rented out to Airbnb. And the problem is that these platforms, they really sit at the table with the municipalities, and they are part of the smart city plan of Amsterdam, and they really put pressure on the city to really adopt their technology, adopt their values, with full disregard for the local values, which are also important. And this is something that you actually see, that the private values of the tech giants are really setting aside sometimes the local values. And finally, one of the things that I'm also interested in is that as lawyers, we care about public contracts. We care about how public-private partnerships are established. And while in the old days of administrative law, which is actually my field of study, We saw that government had too much power and changed contracts all the time, and that was very problematic for citizens. Now we have the tech giants really imposing conditions on the contracts, and small municipalities that want to be smart as well, they don't really offer counterweights. And that's also when public values get lost. So when we talk about public values, one of the things that really pops up as like in the legal discourse is, of course, fundamental rights. What kind of fundamental rights can be actually endangered? While I wouldn't say the right to city is not always a fundamental right, depends on the country we are talking about, I have identified these 4 fundamental rights as being key to the smart city, as being 4 fundamental rights that actually can be damaged. The first one is, of course, privacy, or the right to private life. We see that in cities there are cameras everywhere, and very often with very good intentions. But at the same time, when you have cameras everywhere, people lose autonomy. I'll give you an example. For example, in Eindhoven, in a city in the south of the Netherlands, not far away from here, the municipality wants to be really smart, so they installed cameras and also lights with the scent in a street that was well known for fights at night. There are a lot of bars, and people get into fights when they get drunk, as they always do. So together with Philips, the city decided to nudge these people to behave better. So they had this street lighting that was a little bit purple, because purple is good for your mood. And then it also had like lavender scents. So the idea would be that because we are all very nudgeable, that you always follow the path that has lights and you don't go into dark streets. Even when you're drunk, you don't do that, apparently. So basically, with this, by walking through this well-lit path, you would get like this colored light that would make you feel calmer. And then there would be this spray that would also make you like forget about your fights or disagreements, and then you would be more calm. So basically, you'd be nudged. So this was part of the smart city strategy. As you can imagine, this didn't work very well, because the thing is, with nudging, nudging works a couple of times, but at some point you realize that you're being nudged, and then you don't really want to do that anymore. But this is an example of something like, why would you want to use technology to limit the autonomy of people? Of course you want people to behave better. But at the same time, do you really have to do that? I mean, there are cameras everywhere. Do you really want to film people there? Do you really want to know who actually is going out at night and misbehaving? And this was actually a quite controversial policy in the Netherlands, because it didn't work, and yet people were filmed everywhere. Their voices were recorded because of the microphones. And people never gave their permission to be recorded in public, to be nudged in public. So this was actually quite controversial area of smartness, I would say. But this is not the only one. When you talk about right to equal treatments, this is something that I just addressed before. The smart city is being developed for a few people, not for everyone. It's being developed for everyone who is sitting here in this room today, people who are educated, who are tech savvy, I hope. But it's not being developed by the common person who actually only uses Facebook. Let's face it, Facebook can be used by everyone. You just upload a picture and that's it. But the thing is, there is much more in a smart city that requires some kind of digital literacy, which is not really being taken into account. Does the right to equal treatment also include not wanting to be digital literate? I think so. I think you also shouldn't be excluded from certain public services because you can't use your applications very well. You can't be excluded. But yet you are being excluded. Actually, there are even some municipalities in Europe that actually, like in the Netherlands, for example, this is the example that I know the best. There is a city that actually, a small municipality that actually does not exist as such, like physically. They basically closed down their city hall, and you can only, fill in forms online. What if you can't read very well? What if you are not able to do that? Then there is also the problem, you're being excluded from this, technological world. And this is, something that people have not been analyzing very well, but this is really at stake in most smart cities, that smart cities are really being developed by people who are educated, but really leaving out a lot of people. And the European Commission has actually highlighted this in one of the communications on digital exclusion, that we need to pay attention more to the citizens that are being excluded. Another point that most people don't talk about, but I think it's important to take into account, is also the right to fair trial, equal arms. Smart cities don't collect a lot of evidence. They collect personal data not because they want to, not for the purpose of trialing anyone or finding sanctions, but they actually do. Because, for example, now with license plate reading, which is almost everywhere, basically that you can collect evidence about the presence of people everywhere. And of course, we have a very controversial judgment coming up in the Netherlands about a risk system, a risk assessment system that is actually used in cities, especially in big cities, where people's probability of committing fraud is being calculated. And it's not part of the smart city plan. But the thing is, when you have smart city technology everywhere, this kind of risk assessment systems where data about everyone is being collected is made possible. And then the right to equal arms is put at stake. I mean, if you don't have the right to just be free in the public space, then, I mean, you always have to watch your back. You always have to watch what's being done. There are a number of judgments, mainly at the European Court of Human Rights, on surveillance in the public space. If you collect urban data, if you collect personal data, you have to be careful, of course, that you do. And of course, if you do surveillance, active surveillance in public space, you need to have a legal basis. It's one of the famous judgments of Strasbourg that actually has stated that. But at the same time, this evidence is not excluded from being used in courts, indirectly at least. So in that sense, I'm a bit concerned that this will be one of the future fundamental rights at stake. And I'm sure this is also of interest to all the lawyers present here. And lastly, the right to the city as a human right, which is recognized in your Universal Declaration of Human Rights, is something that is actually, it's an old right, of course, it has existed in the 60s, but this is a right that is important because we see that in smart cities, citizens are not always invited to join the discussion. They are not involved in the construction of the smart city. They are basically imposed this smartness. And the right to the city actually is the opposite. It really invites citizens to join the discussion, to really build the city together. And this is exactly what's not happening. You see that some citizens are being involved in what is called the Fab Labs of hackathons of cities. This is happening. But I mean, let's face it, who joins the hackathon of a smart city? It's not like the common person who can't, who just has minimum education. It's usually like the educated citizen. And this is something that we actually see. Well, is there a solution for this? Well, some cities think they have found a solution. And it's basically the solution of having more enforcement of human rights. And this is basically to avoid that people are left out, like this kind of citizens are left out, but also to make sure that you actually don't have this kind of dialectics, because it's not for nothing that between the first and the second industrial revolution, we were talking about Les Misérables, and right now, if we see at the Oscar nominations, we have Les Misérables again. Because we basically have this narrative of exclusion again in our cities. Because while smart cities always say that they are inclusive, they are really not inclusive. Our cities are not inclusive. And smart city technology is not being designed to be inclusive. It's designed to be exclusive. And this is something that we should really be discussing. So human rights cities claim to be inclusive. Sometimes they are smart, sometimes they are not smart, but they claim to actually have found a narrative that is not a narrative only focused on technology and innovation, but it's focused on human rights. Human rights cities actually are a network of cities throughout the world. They include, for example, Vienna, Graz, Utrecht. I know that in Indonesia there are also some human rights cities. And these cities, they actually affirm that they not only comply with human rights, but they actively involve human rights when deciding policy, when drafting policy. This means that they not only comply with fundamental rights at national or European level, but they really do it at international level. It sounds a bit vague, and it is a bit vague, but what we have seen is that, for example, some cities that claim to be human rights cities, they go beyond or even against national law. So, for example, in the city of Utrecht has actually provided help to undocumented migrants, which according to the Dutch law should not receive any help. But the city decided as a human rights city that they should provide bath, bed, and bread to those in need, regardless of whether they were legal or not in the country. And this is something that has been promoted because there are a lot of networks where these human rights are advertised. And you see that there is growing interest for these human rights hubs. I personally think that this still remains a bit at the very vague and theoretical level, because, I mean, Vienna claims to be a human rights city also because they devote more attention to housing than all the other cities, like there are quite a lot of social housing in Vienna, that there are like networks to create more social housing. The technology which is being developed is centered on people and not on just innovation. But I personally have some hesitation here, because I also still don't see how this actually will solve some problems of equal treatments. Also, I don't see how this will actually help us match technology with the human side of it, but it is an advancement. It's at least like an idea of trying to be actively engaged with human rights. So, to conclude, I would say that there is a movement now against smart cities, a little bit in the media. When you read The Guardian, you see that there's almost every day an article against smart cities. I would say I'm very positive towards smart cities, because technology really can increase the potential of governments, can really optimize a number of services, and I believe it is a really good mix of different technologies, but it is important that we focus also on the fundamental rights dimension. Of course, we can go for slow technology, which is basically being advocated in many cities. Slow technology can teach us a lot, but at the same time, having high tech also can really help us industrialize and really improve the quality of cities. So I would say that it is true that cities may be able to deliver where nation states have failed so far. And they can be really centers for development, for policy innovation, for social justice. But I think it is important to really focus on fundamental rights when defining these policies, by focusing on the citizens, on who is the citizen of the smart city. And right now we actually try to wash cities with the smartness narrative. And I believe this is quite problematic, because when we refer to digital technology, we should really refer to it as a form of human and equality focus. And when we actually see the smart city as a center for sustainability goals, we shouldn't only talk about sustainability in the sense of waste management or water management. We should also talk about sustainability from a social perspective, to ensure that cities are inclusive places where actually the only thing that is really separated is garbage and not people. Thank you.